All right. Good evening, everyone. It is, not to look at my agenda to be sure, Thursday, September 7th, 2023. It is just after 6:30 p.m. And this is a board work session of West Bend School Board. So we were saying for some of our newer members, I think this is the first work session that we've had. So the format is a little bit more casual. It isn't exactly Robert's Rules of Order. We don't have action items on the agenda. And so we're focused really on one item on the agenda. But just as opening item, Superintendent Wimmer, if you can just confirm this meeting was properly posted?
Yes, it was.
Okay, great. And we have board members present, Melanie Aragot and John Donaldson and June Kruger, Kelly Lang, I'm Chris Swigert. Dr. Chad Tenez is just going to be joining us shortly. And Kurt Rebholz has an excused absence. We extend sympathies to him and his family on the passing of his father. And so, and also from the administration, we have Superintendent Jen Wimmer and Dr. Quinn Trueblood, who's our Director of Curriculum and Instruction. I hope I got that right. So with all that for the good of the order, we'll move to our discussion item, which is instructional materials selection. And Superintendent Wimmer, you're going to...
We will, tonight we'll facilitate a discussion with the board, but we want to give a little bit of background. So recall, we've passed some policies. We know that they're going to be iterative, and we've got to get kind of the teeth behind the process behind them. So tonight we'll be hitting on the curriculum development and improvement process, kind of what we have currently and what we want to put in that policy language, either through administrative rules or kind of that update. And then curriculum documents, where to find those, what they look like now, what they'll look like in the future. And then we're going to really sink our teeth into material selection, how we adopt primary resources. So those are things like textbooks. They're used in the classroom as, again, primary resource for instruction. And then we're going to go through the book club adoption and how we propose to do that, give an overview of that process. And then we're going to dig in around, so what is the guidance that we're going to use to select those materials? Recall that we've got some language right now in that policy, so we'll unpack that. And when we do that, we'll give a sample of what that could look like, a sample book list. We already do parent notifications. We've talked about expanding that. We've talked about how do we use ratings to convey information. So we'll walk through a sample of what that could look like and then go through those next steps kind of for our work. So with that, I will get us through. So you have most likely seen this document before. This is the West Bend curriculum cycle. It's the process by which we look at curriculum, evaluate it, whether you're developing something new for a new course or you're looking at kind of what we have in place and you're doing a revisit. It's generally anywhere between a 3 to 5 year cycle around these phases. But you know, when we've talked about, sometimes we get things like technical education where we're changing a course name for Marine Park. There's an industry standard of some time. So these are the big picture phases. What Dr. Trueblood and I spent time doing in relation to the board work is to unpack the really the develop and design phase. And I'm going to have her kind of walk through what the meat of that looks like. Don't worry, I have large print for you to look at. Okay.
Well, I'd like to thank you all, because this is my very first workshop with you, so it's my pleasure. The first one is always, I think, has every potential to be the very best one ever, so I look forward to working with you, and I think this is really such important work, so I thank you so much for your time and your hard work that you've been doing all these months coming along. So I know Jen has given you a large view of this, and I think I'm gonna, do you have an extra? Are you good?
Yep.
Okay, I might need it too.
There you go.
Paper, and so there are 4 phases, and we're really just going to give you a overview today because it is supposed to set the foundation for your discussion. So to frame that up, there are 4 phases, as Superintendent Wimmer stated, but what I wanted to do is provide you an overview of what those key components are within those 4 phases, so you can really start to see that not only is it comprehensive, but it's also pretty complex. But if done right, it can really, really set the district in an amazing position for kids to learn. And so that's what I'm really excited about. So Just looking at this, we always have an evaluation stage, and that is really a stage where we look at our current program and how do we review that. And what I'm specifically going to target tonight is who are the players at most of these phases, who's involved, and how is the adoption process really processed. So in this phase, there are teams from collaborative teams that are our staff members. They're internal. They're also family members to give us feedback for improvements and modifications. We also ask that we examine our academic standards and industry standards and do a whole bunch of other stuff, but what you should know there is that this is a really important part of looking at how do we look at our district. Now I'm going to move over to the development and design stage and break it down into 5 major key areas, and that is development of the program intent, the essential questions for learning. Now specific to tonight will be material selection, so that will be teased out more specifically. But under that material selection section, we do have to determine those resources and those instructional practices, and we have to look at what are the strategies that are really good for learning in the classroom. We have to also conduct a process for how we search and review and select and approve using internal and external stakeholders. And as Superintendent Wimmer stated, you have already articulated as a board what the general criteria are in your iterative policy work. You've also then stated what your specific criteria are, and they'll be highlighted more in the discussion phase, but they are critical to the material selection. And lastly, we want to make sure that we conform with your policies and the budget constraints. The last 2 are instructional strategies, which is really, really important for our staff, maybe not for tonight's meeting, but we also have what we call an action plan that has key components that we need to follow through if we are to meet our mission. Then we go through the implementation phase, and then we have to look at how do we improve ourselves through an assessment and refinement stage. So that is really in totality how curriculum gets developed and improved. So what we can move through in the next section is what we have presently in the district right now is it's on the website, and if you go through a tab in the curriculum link on the website, you'll see that there are many things that are accessible. This is the current state, and I know there's going to be a future state for this, but more importantly, you'll see that there are curriculum maps that are available for 9-12, for almost all the grades. You'll also be able to link specifically on those pacing guides to units of study in any grade level. Also, the course syllabi at the high school level are also available. What I'd like to see now and under construction, though, is that it is more, it's kind of, I wouldn't say everywhere on the website, but it's not as easy to find. So a very good solution is to create a separate website for just curriculum instruction that integrates all of those things so that it makes a lot of sense to you as community members, but also to parents, to anybody who really wants to know how we're teaching our students and what we're using, the resources, when they're studying them, and how are they being assessed, and what are the academic standards, all the things that make learning really great. So, yeah.
So you said we're going to be able to understand, or keep track of when and what kids are learning at what point. Now, how does that play out when kids are falling behind, something happens, and a teacher has to kind of go off that schedule?
It's wide enough room, so you can see it's really large arcs in there, and some of the pieces that she's talking about where you'd be able to take this and drill as deep. When you get down to, as you're talking about in the unit plans, there's some wiggle room around when they put those lessons in, and then it'll give you activities and supports for if someone's struggling. What are some activities for differentiation to get at a student who might be struggling to learn a concept? Maybe a student started this unit and they know or are secure in some knowledge. So there's some pieces, supplementary pieces there that would be articulated right in the curriculum of what that looks like,
Yeah,
as well as a wiggle room. It's not same page, same day.
Yeah.
That is not responsive to kids.
And that's where I was kind of getting this, is it doesn't seem like it's going to be really accurate to be able to follow a map like that, because even in my visits, like, that's one of the barriers is sometimes they can't move as fast as the curriculum plan is forcing them to move. They have to slow it down. let kids catch up, this and that, you know, if something comes up and a snow day or two or what, you know, not the fact that the
All
rules
true,
throw off,
all
but,
true, yes.
you know, there's a lot of
Yes.
factors that are going to come into play.
Yeah, and our
where-
teachers are so skillful at how to do that, because what they want to do is really have kids learn. And so they have a lot of strategies and skills to, like, wiggle room, we call it, but really there's a lot of skill to that. So the district website I just mentioned, I just want to close it out, that it is a fairly sizable undertaking. It will take some time, and what we want to do is make sure it's accessible, usable, open, and accurate. Those are the things that I'm measuring for, and so to meet all those standards, it's going to take a little time, but we are really asking our staff to put their hands on so that we can get the right information and relocate it and sort and organize it so it makes a lot of sense and shows the story of how we teach here. So that I'm excited about, and it is a high priority, and I know it is for you too.
So is there thought that when this is released, that since it is going to take some time, that it'll be, we keep using the word iterative when we discuss this, but a bit at a time, or is it once it's complete, then it'll be released, or is that yet to be determined?
Well, I do know that there are phases of completion. The first one is really those maps and pacing guides.
Mhm.
Those are important, like what is the unit of study. Other things that might be really nice are, you know, more information about areas of curriculum and more information. I mean, just what we call sidebar tabs. You know,
Mhm.
not critical information, but really creates the totality of curriculum instruction. But more, the priority is really what is being taught, are the standards aligned, and how can we really see that whole K-12 progression in our district? That's really, for me, very key.
And I think the other piece too, it will evolve because it's for the end user, which are our students, our families, our public. So we'll have throughout that some phases where we're gathering feedback, asking for suggestions for improvement so that it's meeting those needs as well.
Yeah, that's only good if people use it and like it, right? So that's going to be the test. So we're going to build something that is both usable, open, and likable. I hope people like it. I like it. So the next part is actually very much specific to tonight's discussion. So I do want to take a little bit of time. Yes. Would you pass this on, John, please? Okay. Now, what you're going to see is really two flows tonight, and I don't want it to be so cumbersome, but what Superintendent Wimmer and I have done is try to really distill the real process that can happen and does in some form happen already. But we really want to provide clarity on how this works. So the word adoption is really finalizing through an official body that we can go ahead and purchase and implement. So I really want to focus on how we actually adopt primary resources, because that will dovetail into these book clubs that you'll be discussing tonight. So primary resources, just by definition, are used by all students in the classroom. So they take many forms. They can be classic textbooks, novels, science kits, they can be workbooks and practice masters and their tests and their online and digital sources, etc. Anything that all kids have available to them. So what's important about this particular slide here is that there are quite a few and all participants across the entire district here. You have internal stakeholders that go through quite a rigorous process. You also have external stakeholders who are what I consider to be community members at large. And what's really important here is these members have notice and access to needs. And also that there is real guidance on complaint procedures. That's important. And lastly, you, the school board. And you serve, some of you serve on the curriculum committee, and you are key to this process. And also it will eventually come to the full board for adoption or approval. Okay. General criteria is what I mentioned before, and also specific criteria, which you have in some way, shape, and form, remain a key part of this process. And when it comes to selection, though, what you'll see here is that it goes through a series of stakeholders and quite a linear process, if you will. You'll start with, of course, having resources that meet the goals. It will then go through vetting by the K-12 librarian and also myself. Okay? Then it will then move to the internal stakeholders, who are teachers, building principals, literacy specialists, etc. who then review and make some recommendations, which then flows into the external public viewing. And that will also, all that feedback from the public view will then move through the curriculum committee. Lastly, the curriculum committee would then have the obligation to summarize that process, process that feedback, also review this budget plan, and then deliver the recommendation to the school board. Lastly, as it reaches the school board, then you will conduct your review and make a decision to either approve it or deny. That is really the major steps for selection. Following board approval, we have a formal adoption. Then, only then can other things become initiated, such as purchasing, professional development, and other factors. And lastly, for the teachers, they're in line to this, and they then begin their units of study. Okay? So that's about as fast as I can go through this. This actually takes this is actually a rigorous process, and it takes several months to conduct. But if done well, we always get the very best outcome. So what I want to do next now is show you a little comparing and contrasting similarities and differences to what an adoption process looks like for book clubs, books. So we do have a large paper copy of that also.
I get that you can't see everything on the screen.
Yeah.
Plus, it's easier to take notes. And again, take some time. We're giving you a wide overview. We want to dig into the meat of the discussion around how we select things. But this will come back. When you think about this, take a look at this, digest it a little bit. And then it'll come back when we kind of move through that next iteration of policy and how we review and revise and get those into administrative rules and other supplementary documents for our policy.
And I'm the person who does left-right reading, so I put my primary resource on one side and I put my adoption of the book clubs on the left side, because you'll see that there are some similarities and are some differences. First of all, for the book club adoption, these book clubs are really part of a collection for instruction where students actually have choice. And so there's a distinction. So who's involved who are the participants when we look at material selection here? So these are going to be all internal stakeholders. We're talking about our teachers, we're talking about our literacy specialists, our building administrators, myself, the director, and also the library, district librarian, and also the technology department. They will do in different parts as needed in a review and make some recommendations. The general and specific criteria, stated the third time already, remain the same. And then you'll see that there's a shift in order. We're not selecting at this point. What we're doing right away is we're going to go to conduct the unit of study, which is really what teachers do. It gets into their hands and their work. What the teachers do now is they will make the selection for those book club books. And so how do they do that? First of all, they have to meet some criteria. These books have to come from the primary resource. And if you recall, if they're from the primary resource, they will be, the umbrella for approval has already been stated, okay? Because it's already been primary resource adopted. So what happens is these principles, once that is kind of the preliminary list is made, then it will move through the principals for their review. Those also move through the literacy specialists for their reviews and recommendations. So you have a couple of checkpoints there for sure. In order for it to be actually adopted, it has to be vetted by the library director and also the CNI team. And the final approval really comes to me. And that's a pretty big burden, and it's the right burden. And what happens is I will deliver this to the curriculum committee for their review. So we have many points of checks here.
So what's unique about this is book clubs are ongoing. So you might have your foundational curriculum, all that's approved. They're just looking at, and so this might evolve over time. So let's say we have a curriculum that's, as she was saying, already approved, all those pieces, but we're looking to maybe add a new book or add some new books to the lineup for book clubs. So they might be bringing that in. There's already an approved unit of study that goes with that. So you might see book club lists evolve multiple times, even though the curriculum itself, remember that larger multi-year process, the curriculum hasn't changed, that approval hasn't changed, but some of the resources are evolving with it. So that's why there's the nuance between the two. Yeah.
So obviously throughout this, it talks about, part of the selection is vetted by the library director. So does that mean, I know we're not doing the library portion, but the library's gonna follow a similar outline or?
We're not gonna dig into, you're right, in the library tonight. I'm
But
I'm sure
eventually-
we will, but they will be now cross-connected.
Okay.
They had been standalone
Yeah.
prior, and we're redesigning that to have them integrated.
And I know just with some of the policy stuff we worked on is we want consistency across
Mhm.
library and curriculum stuff because it should be, a similar process to select. So,
That concludes my overview between comparing and contrasting. So the next slide actually summarizes really the two different kinds of materials that we're talking about now, the primary and the book club. And I'll give you, this wasn't,
No, I didn't do a big one for you.
Okay, that's okay. Too many big sheets, so let me just grab mine quick so I can track it a little bit. Ooh.
You want mine?
No, let's see, I should be able to see it. There you go. Thank you. So this is actually what I think to be a significant table, because what you see is who's involved in each of those types. You see that the general and specific criteria remain the same for both. You also see that the selection process is finalized by the curriculum committee in the primary resource, but you'll see that the book clubs, it's finalized by many internal stakeholders here. You've got principals, literacy specialists, and the curriculum team. In order for either of them to be fully adopted, you'll see that the board is going to adopt the primary resource, the umbrella for which these book clubs will fall under, and you'll see that there are 3 levels of review from library, curriculum director, and the curriculum committee itself. Okay? That's the flow through for adoption. And lastly, we just put this in there so you can start to see the real distinction is these units of study and the order in which they fall. When you adopt a large primary resource, the unit of study is at the very end. But when you look at book club selection, that unit of study has already been approved. Okay. That's a significant order of difference.
So when the curriculum committee would see a book club selection, that context would be brought in as to how it fits into you, the study, I'm assuming.
Always, yes.
So is this different than what it was previously? This is a new,
Yes.
This
okay,
is
'cause
the-
I was like, how
Yep.
are these books going through it?
Yep,
No,
yep.
this is the way I highly recommend it to me, and it's, more importantly, it's the right way to do it. We can do it, and we should do it. Those are the 3 factors here, because I don't want to build anything that is too robust and too complicated, because we really want the right links of people involved in the process that is sustainable and has the assurances. And I think this is really, for the district, in the way it's organized, it's very doable.
It removes, again, some of that isolation that maybe occurred before around some selection things. Again, it's giving transparency, accountability, and it's giving board touch points throughout each, even though they vary a little bit.
So again, this is a work session, so we're not taking
Yeah.
action, but encourage any questions, concerns?
Yeah, any questions that you have immediately? Otherwise, take some time. What we did was we unpacked policy to create steps for the process so that we could then further develop those, get those in writing in our supporting documents. So take a little time on that to go through. But I think the biggest thing is getting at what is that criteria and how do we, right? How do we select those materials, and how do we judge those? How do we do that? So this is just pulling out from the general criteria. Our largest discussion has centered around what's excessive when it comes to the language. Obscene language, derogatory language, those pieces. We have clear definitions around detailed description around sexual acts and that content. We also had discussion around graphic violence, the detail of that. We don't have any lingering questions there as a team, and nor had they surfaced at the board level. It was really getting around what is excessive around language, and what are those different levels. We had included in our conversations the shift for kids as they age, right? There's different maturity, that developmental and chronological age, and we said that almost creates a sliding scale, if you will, right? What's appropriate for a kindergartner isn't the same as a 12th grader, isn't the same as an 8th grader. So we started to talk about how do we do that. We had some preliminary discussion around reviews, multiple review agencies. We talked about and toyed with developing our own review system, but really we have to center what are the posts kind of for the teams to operate in around what's excessive in there. And so, for example, we think it should be, you know, all different grade levels. You know, your core elementary is K through 5 in that. For us, there isn't a need to have language that includes profanity, obscenity, derogatory things of that nature in an elementary. So that one was, it almost got a little harder once we started entering the middle school years, right? And so this was for discussion purposes tonight. You don't have to, this isn't what we're proposing. We're fine with this if this is where you land. But it's in those middle years where you start untangling and trying to define what is, what's appropriate. So at grade 6, we're thinking about kind of the text that we have, and we have really lengthy lists, sometimes, you know, 20 titles in a list, we compact those a little bit. But for grade 6, thinking about their levels, we're looking at isolated instances. You know, for sure, a character development, maybe there's some isolated instances, maybe they're uttering a curse word, there's one instance that's some kind of instance for the book. We talked a lot about characters developing, the redemptive value of things. There may be an incident that's in a book. I don't have a title that specifically has one in mind right now, but you know, if you start narrowing and go a 0 and 0 tolerance, when you start getting into the middle school years, you're missing some exposure things as characters learn, grow, and are exposed to things. But again, really then looking at that 7, 8, that they would be more infrequent, seldom occurring in a text.
What does that mean?
Well, and that's what we put in there exactly, because you can't come up with a rate like 0 to 5 words is this.
But I also think that, you know, I mean, obviously that's an example.
Yep.
This is, but even if you have isolated instances, I mean, at the very minimum, that's not following our students' code of conduct. You know, just even with isolated incidents, all the way to high school.
Mhm.
You don't want to hear kids swearing in classes. You don't want to see them making out and whatever else they might do in the hallways.
No, we don't.
And that's what I, you know, if you want to follow student code of conduct and a student handbook, then, you know, we really should, I mean, isolated instances should be at the very most up in that grade. It's like, I understand you're never going to get away from it all, and, you know, I'm reasonable, but like, isolated instances at a 6th grade level just seems kind of crazy to me still.
I have isolated instance, just kind of a one. Kind of a one piece that's.
What, you know, innuendo that
just-
they might not understand?
No,
You know,
I'm
'cause
only
I don't
looking
even-
at, yep, let's untangle, because remember, we're talking about
And I get-
the
this is just
obscene
an example,
language.
and
Yep,
either-
obscene language, derogatory language. Like, we got and already took off the table the content around sex, those pieces around description of the sex act, all of that. That was removed. We're isolating around that language. So again, where you're looking at, and certainly when you're dealing with an adult 18-year-old at the high school and, you know, what they have available and can access.
So could I say, I would just like to give an example of what it could look like in text for an isolated instance. A character in the text could be an 8th grader, 14 years old or so, who like hurt his foot, and in the text, in quote, says, "Oh, shh." That could be part of the story. That would be considered, what I consider to be an isolated incident. That is part of the feeling mode of that
Yeah.
character at that time.
Would that be an appropriate response for an 8th grader in the middle school?
if they were alone, and I'm sure they are, you know, but like you said, shouting it in your hallways, in your classroom, no.
See?
So,
That's where it's
so,
hard for me,
but-
we want to hold students to a standard, but then we want to, you know, allow them to read it. And-
But learning
and-
about something isn't the same
As
as
doing
acting
it.
it out.
Yeah.
I mean, we teach our students about, you
Could be
know,
work.
US history and wars and violence, and then we don't expect them all to go out and become violent. It's just, it's learning about it is one way to help process how to appropriately respond to it. Because in that example, if the student yells that in the hallway, in the book, the character in the book yells at the hallway, that might be then in the story, a good story would then have a corrective measure. Someone's like, hey, you know, you gotta watch what you're saying, you can't. And that is just another example of, you know, kind of another place for people to get coached on, you know, how to respond to certain scenarios. So I don't think just because you read something in a book, that then it's instantly saying, if you can read it in a book, we encourage you and allow you to do it out in public. That's
Well, you're
not
allowing
always.
them to read it, which is, you know, essentially the same thing as saying it.
Yeah,
And there's-
it's a great discussion. I mean, I've debated this in my mind as well, because sometimes to teach someone that something is wrong, you have to teach them about it and explain what it is in the first place. Otherwise, you say, you can't say a certain word, but I can't tell you what the word is, but whatever it is, you can't say it. How do we do that?
So when we were teaching kids that heroin's bad, we let them shoot up in a room?
No,
But
but
if they might read in a text what it
teach them
looks
about it.
like.
Right,
Yeah.
it's to
They
say
might
this
read
is
in a
what it
text
is.
what happens when
Otherwise,
you do that.
otherwise, how do they know what it is? So I think that, you know, we're to prepare people for full life. I'm not saying we have books with all of this, but I think we've got to talk about how do we equip parents and kids with materials that these things can, in the appropriate way, be discussed. Not in the sense of glorification or an instruction manual around this is good.
Yeah.
I
And
think
guess
that would be a very
just-
bad use of curriculum resources.
I would just say that is probably the parent's job to teach that when it's appropriate for them to teach their kids that.
Mhm.
So like, you know, I don't know, I know this is a discussion, these are examples, we're just here chatting and talking about this, but you know, a school isolated incident of a teacher, you know, correcting it in real life is different than here, read this book, this is, there's some funny parts in it that they swear. Kids laugh at that, and it's inappropriate. It's inappropriate for them to read, and it goes against the student conduct. I mean, there's all these factors that play in where, you know, I don't want somebody parenting my child at the school. I mean, I will do that at home when I see fit, and if something happens and you know, a kid, one of my kids says something bad or something happened, then I'll correct that at home. You go sit over here, go to the office, whatever, but they're not gonna sit there, you know, oh, this is why we do this, and this is really, you know, I don't want some moral, you know, story given to my kid outside of my parenting expertise. It's on me what I want my kids to learn from it, you know, not somebody else, and that's kind of where I think, you know, you're saying it can be an isolated incident, it's a learning thing, and it's like, learning from whose perspective though?
I think
know.
you're describing exactly what you feel and where your bar is, and if you were to take that student handbook, then it's a zero.
Yeah.
It's a zero throughout the entire system. And I think, you know, one, that the board needs to talk about what you wish to see. I mean, capturing that, right? Because if we use
Well-
that, then it's nothing. Nothing could be present at any
And I know that's
level of
gonna be
anything.
nearly impossible, I
Yeah.
understand that, and the thing is I think it's hard, because how do we do this in a way that, you know, we're protecting the kids that shouldn't be saying the stuff, maturity level or whatever it is, but it's still accessible in our system for
Yeah.
them, even if they're not at that, like, especially high school level, where they might, you know, 9 to 12, you might have 18-year-olds in 17-year-old, which is consenting or legal adult age, and they can read that all they want, whatever, but you get a ninth grader that might have access to the same materials.
And I think in our first blush, and it's something, you know, for everyone, we'll want everyone to weigh in, I think there's a distinct difference when we unpack developmental ages, that there's a difference between a freshman and a sophomore in those upperclassmen. I think that there's some nuances there.
And even like, even in the same grade, you can have.
There can be,
like
yeah.
a huge range of
Sure.
maturity levels, you
Especially
know?
with middle grades.
Yeah.
It's just, can go anywhere, you know?
Right.
You never-
But I think we get the reality of, we can't, it's not as easy as just saying
Right.
zero.
It's not.
And we gotta do something, right?
And again-
And we wanna get something in people's hands, so.
I think, I totally get where you're coming from.
And I'm not naive thinking kids don't swear.
It's not even,
We
it's
know
not,
that.
it's not even about that, though. I mean, of course they do, but it's not even about that. I think it's really, from my standpoint, is we need to have some guidelines that aren't going to be perfect for everybody. They're just not.
Right.
And so I think we can all agree on, you know, something that is certainly, you know, for sexual conduct, if it's prurient in nature, you know, if it's designed to arouse and gratify, that clearly shouldn't, that's just not, that's a no-go. If violence is, you know, gratuitous and, you know, promoted in a positive manner, you know, that's not, again, you know, if it's glorified, that's something I would agree with, like, that's not something I would really want to shoot for if that's the intent of it, is to glorify it, okay? And swearing is the same way. I mean, I think if it is excessive, if it's out of character, if it's excessive by some guideline, if it's out of character, if it's there completely, you know, superfluous, where it's not really relevant to any part of the story, to any moral lesson to the story, I don't disagree with you on that. But I think that, you know, so I don't think we're arguing miles apart. It just sounds like it because I think as I've looked through this over the last several months, hearing people speak and everything else, I've just come to the conclusion that no one is going to completely agree on this. And the only way we can move forward, and I think as a board, we need to finally move forward. I think we need to have some kind of guideline that is moderately specific, but also loose enough to not entangle us in our own web of like, well, we said this and now this book has 7, you know, I mean, and also the, you know, the curriculum, like for primary materials, also I agree that it's a stricter thing because we are telling kids you must engage with this material. I have a different standard for that. But for a selection, I have a little bit of a looser standard for that because it is selection, because it is choice. And I know access exists, but I'm saying if we do a good job, if we put on curriculum to do a good job and say, you know, these need to be well thought out summaries, they need to be accessible and accurate to parents for selection, and we need to be making sure teachers are following the selection criteria and restriction criteria, then I think that's at least a place where, you know, we can have a loose guideline and move forward. Because otherwise we're just gonna have, it's not that it's not a good discussion, but we're just gonna have this talk forever because your standard is just a little different than my standard. I don't think we're either one of us are not being good parents to our kids, but our standards are just a little different, you know, and I think part of mine is just because the reality of looking at the library, just walk once through the library and say, okay, someone review all of these for everything, for our zero tolerance, you know, it's just never gonna happen.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna put a standard out, it has to happen. I don't think, you know, if we're gonna put a standard out, then everything we have has to have a review of sorts. Not saying it's gonna happen overnight, obviously that's a huge task. But if we're gonna put a standard out and we have books that don't abide by our standards at this point, then what are we doing here, you know?
Chad, you brought up something that maybe we can ask for. So with regard to this selection, how are parents involved?
And yeah, it
Sure,
might be,
because
it
I
might be a
think-
little bit
because I
easier to
think-
go through a sample.
I don't know.
So
Okay.
a couple to help
Sure.
continue the discussion.
I think that's an important aspect. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we believe in, like you said, the parents making that decision for their child. And we've got it on there. So we had talked about, we'd always had parental consent in place around book choice books. This is a sample, this is not ours, this is not anything. It's the same opener, but then we talked about, and we started diving into ratings, right? What's a rating system? What do you got? Do we need to create something? What's existing? We've got a webpage that's, I think you're gonna, one iteration will be up tomorrow.
It's up already.
Oh, there you go, already up. That walks people through these sources as well as other sources that they could go online and find out more information. But we were saying we wanted to take the burden from our parents. Before we were just giving titles, they could cross them out and they sign. This would be a sample. So again, this is a sample if we were to do a dystopian unit, dystopian, you know, kind of made up. I can throw that up on the screen. This is our same sample letter. It's just giving them links to pieces. What we did was break out these core areas around. So in the sample that you're seeing, again, our families have the opportunity to draw a line through any title you don't want your child to have read, return date. Most, this is just 3, so most would have 6 to 10 titles. Just so you know, I just put together something for purpose of discussion. So you see 3 titles, and I'll center on the giver. So the giver, you can see in there, we're alerting that, hey, there's some sexual content, there's some, we would probably remove the word graphic, because it's not graphic violence in this, just noting that it's there. So it doesn't, there's no sexually explicit items in there, there's no graphic violence around that. So it's allowed and would make it through the list, but I'm also alerting people, like, hey, there's a scene in there where elders are bathed by, like, that's someone's job. There's reference to stirrings that are equal to sexual feelings on that. And then there's a detailed memory of, in this dystopian society, how people who are unsuitable, whether infants, elders, etc., they are removed through, you know, they're killed in some way. There's nothing graphic, it's just they are removed and exited from society in that way. So that's one where, again, it would meet that, but we're giving really clear, as a family, this is what this contains in there, and then giving them links to, you can see in Book Looks and Common Sense, we kind of just took kind of some different bookends of pieces, but there's a lot that has not been reviewed yet. So hence putting the Amazon out there, where there's gonna be multiple reviews, and people can kind of search through their own lens as a family, what they would like. Now, our website would contain even more links to other sources that you could continue to review. But I think this sample shows how we would be giving families that next layer of information so that they've got it in front of them and could make a sound choice, that it aligns with their values, and then again, that they have to authorize that. And then we've also talked about at the committee level prior, that as we put together a list, that I'm not putting together one that's got, you know, every single option has got some kind of nuance to it, you know, in there. That there's a wide variety in that where it's not gonna hit any of those marks for anyone, so that they have choice.
Yeah.
Because we were saying some of the other lists could have been overly weighted in one way or the other, so we'd be looking for balance in that. So, and that's what then the curriculum committee would be reviewing, all these pieces around selection and ensuring we meet kind of those fence posts and parameters that we set. But right now, we're operating, we can't teach any, because I don't know what those fence posts are. So that's kind of positioning us back to have that conversation around, so where do we want, this is just going through what our intention is around that. But that's what that work could look like around there. But we really have to get, so where are those fence posts? And I agree, I think a zero tolerance all the way through the system, that's gonna be hard to achieve and timely in trying to find that.
And these would have to be signed off on, correct? Like a student couldn't select any books unless this was reviewed, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And we have in our process even that if, because we you know, love students and we know they're not gonna return things. You have, you know, a multi-week window to return that. Our staff would follow up with families if they haven't returned it to get their authorization, remind them that they haven't seen that. You could take that over the phone, mark it, like I'm marking this, that you've got that, I'm gonna send that home for you to sign it so we can proceed. But
Okay.
yeah, you would want that consent.
You think the draw a line through the title, you do not want your child to read section, do you think that can get a little bit skewed? I mean, what if you drop a pen, you know? What if we have to, like, they have to initial or something, beside?
A permanent thing. It's not gonna come in.
Well, you don't want a positive one, so you don't want them to circle it, because a kid could go in and circle extra
No,
stuff after.
I'm saying
So-
the parent initial each book that is
You
allowed,
could.
then sign, like, you know, I don't know, that might be.
I would
asking a little
just
much.
have them I would have the list and then have a checkbox
Or
for
a
ones they
checkbox.
could not read.
Yeah.
So that way, no one's gonna accidentally mark one, you know, then.
Yeah,
You know, I would just make them have to mark the ones that are a no.
yeah, that would be very
They can't be
easy.
unmarked.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
to amend
that, I agree, I mean, and that's what I'm saying, like, it has to be reviewed, they can't, the student can't come in and say, well, they just haven't got together, my parents don't care, or whatever.
Mhm.
It would say, no, it's gotta be on file.
Yeah, and like I
Because then
said,
we
you
have
don't
a-
want them circling their own.
Right, so it's gotta be, it's gotta be signed off and
Mhm.
marked. I think that is appropriate, it should be that.
Practically speaking, and I agree with you on making sure that there's a checkbox, because that's really clear, there's a spot for it. But in the reality of things, just like permission slips for going to the pumpkin farm, sometimes parents get really busy, or whatever the case is, and really, this is meant to be released about a week before, or maybe a little earlier.
Oh, I think
But
we had multiple
it's-
weeks prior. Yeah.
Instruction has to start at some point.
Sure.
So if they're unsigned and there's been attempts, and it is unmet, we have to proceed as if all of it is available. There's no way, we
That
can't
the
just
child
not
can
allow
choose.
the child not to participate. So-
Would it be allowable to say if it is not returned, then only ones that had no questionable material would be allowed?
That would be.
I would be comfortable defaulting to something like that, where if they're like, oh, I didn't
on
return
return,
it,
you
well,
find
then
these
you
three.
only have access, in this
Yeah.
category, you'd only have access to City of Embers
I
and
think that's good.
Nautilus. You wouldn't even have access, like, sorry, you didn't return it, you can't, unless I get something from your parents, you can't even access the giver.
I think that's good.
I mean, that way it defaults to the
Easy.
lowest common
Mhm.
denominator.
I think that would be easy to amend.
Yeah. I mean, I think to the discussion that, that both of you had earlier around, different standards, I think this is really important and good
Yes, I
tiebreaker.
like it.
Because if there is parental consent, and I think what's different than the prior, correct me if I'm wrong, is rather than just parents, here are 3 books that are in book club, is it okay, right?
Yeah,
This
it was
is
cross
actually-
them out, but it was only the title.
Sure, this to me looks like, okay, it's more informative,
Mhm.
right? And
Visual.
visual, and
Mhm.
outside other resources that if they really want to dig in. But if they don't want to dig in, the big 3 categories, language, sexual content, violence,
Right.
are right in front of them.
Right.
So it's equipping them better to make a better
Yeah,
decision.
because you could definitely have books that would not check these 3 boxes, and some
Mhm.
parent might be like, oh, I didn't know they were gonna be teaching about Hinduism or something like that, or that was gonna be in the book of some, you know what I mean? Like, there could be other things that parents object to, so the description, I think, is important, because it kind of can cover some of the other areas that aren't the big 3, if you will.
Mhm.
So, again, I think the more information we can put on, I like reviews that they can go in and review further if they want. If they're like, boy, I don't know, I heard bad things about that book, but it looks okay on here, I can go review it, and then they can just say, no, not for my kid.
Yeah, and I think your point, John, which is a really good one around, look, I don't want the school teaching my child X, Y, or Z. I think this is a mechanism to say, then check it and cross it out.
Yeah, and I like the default. How
Yeah,
we know
defaults-
exactly where to
defaults to the
default,
one
that's
that-
easy to amend,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the obscene language portion, is it just gonna say yes or no?
Yeah, we would put there, and we can put in, again,
I mean.
we're gonna have to get you back to this discussion.
So we're gonna have to
So how-
go to a standard of, okay, so.
How much or where?
Obscene language, I mean, obviously,
You're gonna write either isolated
The other
instances,
Sporadic,
infrequent, or sporadic.
It wouldn't make the
Well,
list
it
by
would make
grade
the list
level.
By grade level.
So if it's a grade level and it's elementary, no, that's
It
a
doesn't-
no.
it doesn't
I'm
show on the list.
It
real,
wouldn't show up at all.
it wouldn't make the list.
Yeah.
For,
yeah, I just don't know, if we would list out,
You're gonna write the swear words in your
I-
box.
the.
I wouldn't
the
write it
couple-
there.
The couple, I don't know, the main ones.
I
But I
would,
mean, that's
I
what-
would put in,
There's links to those reviews.
Yeah.
I mean, if the box is checked yes, there's obscene language,
I mean, cause I think there,
then you could easily see exactly, because a lot of these review sites do list everything and by number sometimes.
and that's what, I think
Some
there was a
some.
list or a site that would count how many swear words are in the book.
Some, it's not all
If
inclusive.
it's not,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, a lot of them were coming up with, but they're growing every day. So we can do that, and that's the purpose of the website and those. But again, to your point, so let's say I've got, let's say we use that example, and in 8th grade, there's the potential to have that. I would check yes on that, and then I would talk about, there's an incident in which the character, uses, or there's an incident in which an adult character or a child character uses profanity, or there's, some throughout as characters react or respond.
Mhm.
And give a little bit more detail around that, so that they're either digging further, or, you know, that's, okay, I understand the context and I'm okay with that developmentally.
So really, what you're talking about is somewhat of a two-step process. So what's up on the screen right now is, that's the hurdle, and words are tough to use, but let's just assume that each of those is a hurdle that, if it exceeds that, it doesn't even show up on this list
That's
at
right.
all.
Right,
That's right.
correct.
Right,
It's already removed.
at all, it is
Yep.
out.
Those are the bars.
Right, that's the immediate bar where we're not even putting on the list. But then, if it is, then we put it here with these disclosures to allow parental
Correct.
consent.
And I think for us, it's really easy to say in K-5, there shouldn't be any, right? And no one disagrees with that, there's plenty of literature, that it shouldn't be there.
Do you think 6 should be grouped in with that because they're in the same building?
Could be, but there, a lot of middle school literature, they're middle school age, that you're starting, again, that's why we just put if there's an isolated incident in something, I don't wanna throw the baby out with the bathwater if there's a one-off incident on something. You could say as a board, yeah, we want it to be K-6. That's for the board to discuss and give us, we just need kind of those fence posts so we can execute. So if that's something that you'd like to propose, is we extend that K-6,
I mean, either way, but I would say it would make more sense to group it by hour of school, where, so K-4, K through 4, and then 5, 6, and then 7, 8. That, to me, that just makes more sense, because you're talking
Right.
about people in the same
if
building.
you're going 5-6 developmentally, I'd lower the bar.
That's what I'm saying, like, I
Yeah,
don't
I'd
care
go
which
to-
way, I don't care which way you
Yeah.
go on that, but
I'd
I'm
go to the lower.
saying, it makes sense to group them together, though, rather than separate
I
them.
would agree. I mean, by school's gonna be easier to just, these books aren't in the school, then anybody in that grade level doesn't have access to something they shouldn't.
Yeah, and
So
I,
that's the biggest concern I have, is just because we pass it for 9th or 12th grade, it's still in the same school for 9th.
Sure.
You know, and that's where, if you do it by school like that kind of clears it up where, you know, a 5th and a 6th grader would have access to the same stuff, and we default it to the lower grade
So-
of that.
Is the board centering around K through 6, none? 0 instances?
I mean, yeah, because I definitely, if we're gonna group it that way, then I would concede to that, because, I mean, I think for K through 4, I would definitely agree to that.
I'd also be
5 and
curious
6.
to see if there's anything that stands out already that would be disqualified because of that.
Why don't we make that part of the work when we bring it forward to curriculum? That we kind of say, here's what was and here's what gets discounted
Yeah,
because of this. So that's part of your review. So
That's
we
the
need to
part that I would
revisit
wanna
that.
see, is
Yeah.
like, you know, it's easy to say from a moral standpoint, yes, make it all the none, but there might be books that everyone accepts right now, like, oh yeah, that's what, I read that book in 5th grade, whatever.
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's gone? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I think the
Yeah, we
Hunger
could-
Games is read in 6th grade.
I'm sorry?
The Hunger Games is read in 6th grade, I believe, which can be,
Sure.
might have a swear word, it's a little bit
Mhm.
violent.
Yeah, that will definitely terrify a kid. There's some mental states in the movies especially. I can only imagine, you know, reading the description of how, you know, some of those are, and that would scare a child.
I don't think it's,
So why don't we test, move forward with a K through 6 as a none being the bar, and then we'll make sure and bring forward the full, like kind of what was done in the past versus kind of what we're bringing forward in the future, so you can see that in context.
Yeah, that would help for me, that would help me decide where I wanted to put
Yeah.
the bar for 5 and 6.
Yeah, it puts it into reality a little bit.
I really like this, I mean, this is great to be able to send home and see in one place.
And require affirmative consent.
I like that.
I just need a clarification. So for obscene language, it looks like our fence posts are getting set, which is
Yeah.
really great. Good job. Let's moving forward though. Let's just say there's a grade band. Let's just say 6th grade, we say it's 0, but let's just leave it as it was. That's 6, let's make it 7th grade, okay? 7th grade is, what is it? Infrequent. So that would be the actual language, infrequent. And so we have to say yes or no to that. We can't just say, these are the words, right? So I just want to be clear that if there is infrequent obscenity or obscene words, whatever those words are, I do not think it's easy for us to tell everybody what they are and how often they are. We just have to say yes or no,
Well,
that it's infrequent.
If we agree on the criteria
Yeah.
in concept, then I'm.
There's no further
And I
discussion.
think it's important that we maybe have an example available on the website for like, if parents like, what infrequent, what does that mean?
Sure.
Then they could go to the website and say,
Here's
oh,
three
here's the
samples.
definition or the example.
We talked about that at
Because I want
curriculum
everyone to be
too,
able to have
having
the same
some,
language.
yeah, we talked about at curriculum having some kind of exemplars for, and saying, okay, this one, you know, the Goldilocks, right? Too little, too much, what's in the middle, and what those samples look like. To your point, having them accessible and maybe some things we might be familiar with
Yeah.
would be helpful to kind of set that
It
for
needs to
people.
be a universal language that is accessible to everyone. And again, it may not be that we all agree on what infrequent means, but we need to be able to look up and say, what does infrequent mean on this piece of paper?
Mhm.
So,
And again, it would still be, even if, fine, it meets the infrequent bar, still is disclosed on here, but also,
Correct.
as a reminder, these resources do still need to go through curriculum committee.
Correct,
And so there would be a discussion at that point as well about the resource, correct?
correct.
And the opportunity to ask more questions about, well, what is it exactly?
Mhm.
So this isn't that these resources just go on kind of autopilot and end up, you know, in the curriculum.
Do you want, so when we look at K-6 as one, 7, 8, if we were looking at infrequent, is there any concern about that? Is there any different bar that people want to talk about for grades 7 and 8?
I guess I would just like to see the example. You know, do we have a book in mind that has an
Sure.
infrequent, you know, or you know, a small number of books or,
Yeah,
you know, whatever that we can kind of.
We've looked up so many words. What's sporadic? What's smattering? What's a sprinkle? What's this? What's that? You know, trying to find what does that mean and how to define it. Well, why don't we use kind of our vision of what infrequent is through the first iteration and see if that meets that test. Yeah, why don't we at least in the interim try and find a couple titles that might fit these bars and get them to you as board members so that you could read and see some context. So what you know, I think everyone knows what a nun is, but what is, if we saw a text that was infrequent, like what does that look like? And maybe do a shared reading of something and go, oh, this is what that would look like in a book.
So, I mean, infrequent, according to your little, you know,
Seldom occurs.
seldom occurs, I mean.
Mhm.
If I'm looking at the next one, it says sporadic, irregular.
Irregular intervals, in a few places, it's scattered in
So-
the text.
You know, a few places is,
Mhm.
you know, a handful.
Yep.
So by that definition, infrequent would be less, you know,
Mhm.
probably 2 or 3. And what words is that? See, I think that's another part of the standard that we gotta think about is infrequent, what word?
Mhm.
The C word? Because,
Right.
okay.
There's a
There's
difference
a
in
difference between
language
that and the F word,
developmentally.
or,
Yeah.
you know.
We didn't want to put the list of profanity up, but I think we,
I
But
mean,
we're,
I think we
but
know
then
where
we're
that
allowing kids to
hierarchy
read it,
is.
so don't you see the kind of the standard
no, I
that
think
we're
we'd be
crossing
looking
there?
at developmentally. So if I'm looking at infrequent 7th and 8th grade, I'm looking at your basics.
Mhm.
You know, I'm not going to repeat it, but I'm not elevating to a C word in 7th and 8th grade. You're just not. You're looking at your basics of, you know.
I mean, there are some, you know, there are some families who, you know, would consider hell or damn a significant.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, and that's their choice, I'm okay with them feeling that way, you know what I mean? And there are other families who would find no problem with that, they'll go, I didn't know you're counting as a swear word.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think you're gonna always have a spectrum of opinion on that. And so, infrequent, this is,
Yeah.
It will be on the.
Yes, we would put that in.
right, yeah, and I think that's my biggest point in this, from the beginning, was if information going home to parents is thorough, and if we default to the lowest common denominator, and if we have to have affirmative responses, then I feel, and the descriptions are good, and there's resources linked, like from outside of our school district, resources linked, I mean, to me, that is the epitome of parental choice. And it's not half of what we've been discussing or hearing about, it's not even the context of the actual books we've been talking about, it's really just, you know, parental choice, you know what I mean? Because in my opinion, if we can't agree on a concept, then every single book is gonna come up for some sort of discussion and disagreement, because some people are gonna be like, well, by you saying you want it gone, you've removed my choice as a parent to allow my kid to have it in school. And vice versa, you say, well, I don't want my kid to have access to it. You're both right, I mean, I think both people have an argument there, and so I think we just need to come to some kind of terminology that is maybe not perfect, but that at least is a common ground that meets 80 to 90% of the spectrum, you know.
Well, I'm appreciative that the board has taken, I'll use it again, the word iterative approach, because I think this is going to be a journey, because no matter what words we pick, we're going to ask administration to go forth, and we're going to find some things that flirt with the edges. And then we come back and we talk about that and we refine it. It's got to be that way. If we wait until it's perfect, we're not going to have this adopted for years. And I think this, what I've seen, advances the football down the field significantly. And I would hate, right, and I'm not trying to evade anything, I'm saying, boy, I would hate to delay it. Perfection in this case is a bit of the enemy. I don't want to be neglectful, but what I see here, I like, and I think would be very, very good for our community. So I'd ask that we take that into consideration as well.
Have our library staff, literacy staff all seen this?
So we work with our district librarian, Kim, who's here. We work with 10 members of curriculum, but we have not rolled this out to staff
Okay.
until we have some parameters from the board, and then we would immediately turn that around to them.
I would just be curious for feedback. I mean, I know it's great to have the process, but this is going to change a lot. I would just be curious.
So in there, process-wise, and we can kind of get to that, it's at the tail end, we would recommend kind of going through, setting something, advancing the work, and then reconvening with our staff to get feedback around that, so that if we have to refine anything into the next quarter, that we've included them in the process.
Yeah, oh, that's great.
Yeah, we would want to do that, along with our families. We talked prior around, you know, John was saying, like, how do we engage families, survey them, see, like, how was this, did this meet your needs? We need to do that kind of, I think it would be great if we had a product, a first pass, said, here's the work, give us feedback so that we can, again, if we've got to make any evolution to it, then we can.
I guess, from the standards, you know, the 11, 12 grade may occur throughout the text. I guess I would just never go there.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was leaning towards. I like the none for K through 6, maybe do like infrequent for the 7th and 8th, keep that, because it's not very often. And then just do sporadic at the high school level. I guess I don't see any reason why may occur throughout the text would be necessary
That just like,
as an option.
yeah, that just kind of screams every other sentence.
I think what we were talking about earlier about, you know, perhaps there are examples of ones that would either meet or not meet the criteria to kind of help us, you know, to help us understand would be.
Is that
Appreciate
something, kind of what they've got on that, so we do K-6, none, 7, 8, infrequent, and grades 9 through 12, perhaps sporadic as a first pass? And see what that would look like, go through our current list, our proposed list, see what it would look like, it would come through, and then get to a place where we're comfortable launching that, and then gather that feedback from staff and families after.
Go ahead.
I guess I'm not interested in saying yes or no to anything until I have examples. Like,
Yeah,
what does
that's
that look
fine.
like in a book? Like, what are we considering sporadic or infrequent? Because I can't just, I mean, not in good faith to anybody in the community to say, yes, your kid's okay reading sporadic swear words or whatever we're considering from that
What does
list.
this look
That's- Yeah.
I think that's a good point. I think the idea is, that's the first bar over which, look, if it violates, it's not even going to come from administration forward. This is not the seal of approval that if it's great. That's the, now we get to this stage, which is, well, here it is, parents, and we need to make a decision.
And I think, yes, I think we're on a good path because sporadic, from what they're looking at, is a few swear words throughout the text. And it would be listed on here, sporadic, and we would have some kind of
Samples,
definition of, you know, maybe a key sporadic is less than 15.
And here's some sample text, and not only the one that you're looking at, but maybe some ones that they're familiar with.
Right.
You know, that we,
So,
I'd
I mean,
rather have
you know,
access
by
to.
that standard, that's the only reason I'd be like, okay, that seems reasonable, and like, we're gonna list it, give the parents the option, I mean, so, but I mean, I still don't know what that looks like as well.
Yeah.
And I think
Have an example.
I think getting the examples is good, because I do still think that, I don't think that I would necessarily be comfortable putting the same restrictions on an 11th and 12th grader and a 9th and 10th grader.
Right, I mean, we're
And-
talking a 14-year-old to an 18-year-old.
Correct, and that's why I'm saying I don't disagree with sporadic being on there. And maybe, you know, it may occur throughout the text isn't the right one for 11 and 12, but I think there should be potentially some other delineation, you know, than sporadic.
My-
Because we're talking about potentially adults.
I get that, but my concern is who has access to it. If we allow may occur throughout, then we're saying that's okay through the library, through whatever, and everybody in that school, from 14 all the way up to 18, has access to it.
These are book club books, so they're only that class in which
So they
kids
will
are
not be in
taking
the
it.
library?
So they are, those titles are commonly found in library. We were saying they have to be vetted there too.
But that's
to
what I'm
make that in
saying,
there,
so
but
how do we?
This is more restrictive than a library, actually.
But we're talking about evolving this across the district and having the library have the same standards.
We're talking only about these two pieces right now. That library's next bigger fish.
But we're gonna take this
Yeah.
right to that side anyways, because I like where we're going with as far as, you know, what's allowed and what's not allowed, and, you know,
So
it
let
just seems like a
us,
good standard.
I think
let's leave 9, 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
Let's not use the words may, you know, let's find some other category that says it, and then let's find books that fit each bucket, and get them to so that you could see what they look like, right? So you could see like, oh, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, I would.
For an
like some
11th and
examples.
12th grade appropriate book
Mhm.
versus this is not something I'd put in front of a freshman.
I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming the reason why we can't just lump everything together with the library piece right away is because libraries have a different set of
Yeah,
They
that's a
have a
different
very- they have a
policy,
very
different
different set
standards,
of
yep, different everything.
rules and governances,
Which is completely asinine.
but not, it may be.
We'll
but
get
it's
there as
not
a next
the
step
course
in
of
conversation, but we can't tackle it all at once.
And let me ask something about 11 and 12. Is the delineation of 11 and 12 because some of those students are eligible for college level courses at that point, and there's a
Not
little
just
bit of
that,
a-
yeah, not just that, this is, so we're talking about core classes, so when you're talking about college level, AP and those pieces, that's a course that you select that you can affirm, deny, you have opportunities through there too. Those aren't lists that we're cultivating necessarily, so you can make your statement through choice of the courses you take. We're talking about, this is your, you know, freshman required English, this is what curriculum looks like.
So the may occur throughout the text versus excessive obscene language, like where's that line?
We're not
Right?
bringing forward anything that has
Right,
excessive too.
but I
Yeah.
mean, so
Yeah.
if we're saying if it may occur throughout the text, like, is that excessive? If it's occurring throughout the whole text, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it's that frequency in action. I think you probably
So
need
I
to see that
that's
a
probably why
title.
we need to see what may
Yeah.
occur throughout the text
Yeah.
actually looks like in a book, because it's like, you know, some of the ones that have come up for review, like.
If anyone can come up with a new clever title for that,
Yeah.
instead of what
Yeah,
that looks
better
like,
description.
we can get the samples in front of you, but like you said, how do we label that? I know how to make information really clear
Yeah.
to families, regardless of what that label is, but we're just trying to define what
I
that
think
looks
that
like.
makes sense.
What's the
It
next step
may.
to sporadic? What's the
Mhm.
next level of descriptor? I mean, it's more than occasional,
Mhm.
Yeah,
but it's less than excessive.
but we're not, like you said, your page turner isn't gonna be, that's not even how
Yeah.
most books are written, where they're filled
I'm
with.
assuming, when I read may occur throughout the text, I don't assume it means every page has profanity on it. That, to me, means excessive.
Yeah.
I would
Mhm.
assume that means like it may be thematically relevant to the story, so there may be some theme or some word someone is called or something like that that may occur multiple times throughout the text because it's thematically relevant to the story. I don't assume that it just means free range
And
to swear every other word and
Yeah.
so that's
by
the book.
by that example, like, you know, I can totally see, let's say, a war book in,
Mhm.
you know, a World War II book having excessive or
Mhm.
may
Language in
occur
it.
throughout, because you're talking emotional times through World War II and,
Sure.
you know, all those.
Sure. Or violence may occur,
Yeah.
it's thematic throughout the book.
That,
And again, it's, I think
That's
you
hard. That's
think of it
hard
as
to
like
do.
mature, I would think of it just as like a mature rating. I mean, almost like you have said before with our ratings, for example, which are, 17 and up, which is basically junior and seniors, and, I mean, to me, that's, again, I know that it's not our job to, us purposely expose people who are about to become adults to, anything that, we're not comfortable with, but, I mean, the reality of it is also, I think just 11th and 12th graders are different than, freshmen and sophomores. They're just different, and they're, I mean.
What would be really nice to see is, and I know this is gonna be really hard to do, but, if you take an example, like May occur throughout, and you have, maybe it's a war book. Because that's probably gonna be one that you're gonna be like on the fence of,
Yeah.
this is literal history, and this is, this is this and this. And then you take a similar war book that might not have that, and see if the value is really there in the one that we're potentially gonna allow because it may occur throughout the day.
So-
See if it has any educational value to it.
Yeah, and I agree with you about what is the value of the book, you know what I mean? Like, why does this one have to have this and not? And I think that's where we have to lean on curriculum to say, hey, is there value to this book? Like, is it relevant to the story that these words exist? I mean, it's easy when you have a song that you're gonna play on the radio and you can do a radio edit and you can just have two versions of your song out that exist, but it's hard to do with books don't come like that. We don't have radio edit books, and so that's where you're stuck with the whole black and white of like, well, either the whole book goes because we can't take out these 7 words that are in here or whatever. So that's where I struggle with removing books over profanity or things like that, is sometimes because it's like, yes, it sucks that they chose to use those words here, but there's value in this book, and now we're gonna toss it because there's 7 words, even if we're targeting it towards juniors and seniors.
Yeah, there's absolute no value when someone's sticking, a description of some boy sticking his head out the window saying, oh, you're so, all this and that to some girl walking down the street. There's no value to that. It's not, there's no relevance to a kid needing to read something like that in school at all. So yes, you made a good point. I think that, and that's hard because I don't want, may occur seems like a lot. May occur throughout seems like a lot. I mean, even in a war book or something like that, sporadic seems like would be more than enough that you would need to get the point across of how emotional and how intense a situation is in a book like that. That's why I really examples.
That's okay, we can build that, but I think to your point too, John, where we're looking at titles, where your whole book list of multiple titles doesn't have info in every one of these boxes. You're providing titles that do meet that 0 at every level.
Yeah.
That's our obligation, is to provide those titles that don't tick any of these boxes for people.
Yeah, I would never be in favor of a list that included a majority
Right.
or excessive amounts where everyone had categories.
And that's easy for,
It should-
that's
it
the
should
one
be
thing
the
that's easy for us
opposite.
to quantify.
So we're already making like a huge
Stride.
stride.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
We're on the iterative
Big
process.
changes
Yeah.
from what it was.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I really like this one.
So why don't we put together, we'll keep the K-6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, 12. We'll put some actual books to them and get them in your hands so you can kind of see what they are. We'll play around with what a phrase at 11, 12 looks like that meets that, and do that. So if those are okay with the board, kind of where we're landing, we have enough to proceed then with some of the work and engage our teachers so that we can cultivate some of these examples, these lists, and keep moving forward on that.
I mean, I think we have to, I
Agreed.
mean, I don't think everyone here is going to agree on exactly how we'd like to see it, because we all wrote our own. We probably have, 7 or 6 different versions of what it would look like, even though they might be similar, but I think we have to do a service to the teachers and the curriculum and students and say, okay, well, we have to get them something so they can start doing these
Yeah.
things. And, I mean, even though we may have some disagreements here and there on the edges of where some of these are, I don't think in concept we're disagreeing that K through 5 is different than high school. So-
Well, and again, that sincere obligation to provide something where none of the boxes are checked. for all kids of every age,
Yep.
to meet the needs of any family, any student.
And then leave it up to the parent at the
Right.
very end to choose.
Yeah,
That-
that we're
that's-
creating
that's
a way
usually the
more,
key point.
and that's something Melanie and I talked about, curriculum, a way more balanced approach in the overall list,
Mhm.
in the overall list
Yeah.
for those pieces.
And again, I agree, this is several steps forward, and that's what we're shooting for.
For us, in kind of where we're landing in those pieces, I think it's easy for us to advance the work, gather everyone around it. So again, knowing that we're really centering around the book clubs, we've got those other pieces, we had the samples, we're gonna clean up the sample based on your feedback. We're going to put together and start convening people what the samples would look like, so you could see them before they go into play. And some sample titles that would kind of meet those different bands. So you could really, kind of, what does that look like?
Might want to not restrict it to just parents then.
Parent, oh, yeah, it should
Parent,
say
guardian.
parent and guardian on our stuff. But yeah, so I think that's easy for us to move that forward and get you probably some samples of those books earlier rather than later that you can just read. So it'll come without all of these parts, but it would be some things that we just pull from a shelf and maybe give you as shared reading, like this is what this looks like, kind of thing, so that you could start that work. Sometimes I'm working, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes my, there we go. So we were talking about kind of summarizing where we are. We tackled primary resources and book club selections. We're getting really close to execution on that. Your primary resources have full board action approval. All the work we're talking about has to get vetted through our committee, and we'll engage with the whole board because this is a first process on that. So we'll do some cleanup. We aren't talking about supplementary resources right now, and we aren't talking about the whole library right now. So those we can look at in future, because again, there's different nuances to library and all of that. But at least this is getting us moving forward and, starting to, and then if we want to look at alignment, if we want to look at something in the future, at least we've got a springboard. This is the worst
And
clicker
then-
ever, Tim.
And again, you did say the, yeah, the word up there now, I can't think of it.
Supplementary
Supplement-
and primary?
The primary
Yep.
feeds into the next level.
Yep.
So the book club stuff.
Mhm.
So the book club is only going to be able to select off of whatever primarily,
Right, you've approved those pieces, we know what the construct of the curriculum is, all those have been authorized, they have a layer of authorization. This is allowing us, we were saying at least to get this work, it'll be quick, but we have some existing lists that we can cull from. We'll educate our staff around this. We will support through both of our departments, out of my office, out of the entire curriculum team. We will do a lift on behalf of the teachers. We will get the links in on their list. We will get that info in so that they're not having to do that lift while they're kind of starting up school, but then they're actually just kind of gathering, advising, looking at it, so we can get it back to committee and to look at and see what does that look like for the full board. We'd like to get some resources in the hands of our staff by October, because that puts them still 5 solid weeks in Q1, so that if they had things to do and get to, that they can still capture that learning within the quarter as intended.
So ultimately, the work here tonight that we talked about, we'll need to talk a policy about whether or not additional things need to be tweaked there.
So yeah, if we wanna go to, again, this should be radio. So we will, what I'd like you to do is take some time, think about the process. Again, we've shifted to a little bit more clarity, accountability all along the way. Talk about, give us feedback, because then we will put that in that next layer of policy language, ARs, all of that. So you're getting feedback on these pieces. We would begin Q1 book list. We were hoping that we kind of got to something where we could go, yep, I have clear fence posts, which I think we did. We'll start that work, kind of using those fence posts around those different bands, so that we can get something back to the committee and back to the group, so that we can hopefully have this moving forward in the classrooms soon. And then we would really be getting feedback now along the way, and then also look for kind of post this first experience, for everyone, our staff, our families, everyone to talk to us around, does it meet, are there tweaks, or were there things that we were like, this kind of stuff, just getting a wide swath of feedback from everyone who was involved and affected on that.
I think feedback's important.
Yeah, I think so too. Like you said, from the users and what are we coming up against? I think that'll be nice to see the context of what got, missed out, or, ooh, this is too narrow, or this was too broad, or what does that look like? As we try and use something, we'll have to refine it, certainly.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Again, our first step is to grab some titles that we think kind of fit those things, just to get you reading and experiencing, and then we'll start putting together that work. We may have to schedule a curriculum committee to attend to this, just so that we're,
September 17th, a couple weeks from now, there's one.
yeah, and we could probably get a lot of work done. Again, we're only going to deal with quarter one before we put anything in the hands of kids. That was our commitment. And we're also going to narrow that, so it's just, maybe a 6 to 10 selections for a list instead of a huge, just to scale the work, make sure that we're doing it really comprehensively.
And what's your thoughts on potentially getting some books in question of where they belong on our new list and getting parents or a community review source? Here's a list of books, how would you, and then sell them, where would you put these in this list? Sporadic, and just kind of get
Oh,
a
sure.
secondary
Sure,
feedback
so
from the community.
Some of the, well, I wouldn't want to have to go through a whole bunch of work if I know I'm not going to put that in play. It's not going to make the cut based on how we've evolved
Well, I
this.
mean, we're all here because we're
Yeah.
selected by the community.
Mm-hmm.
I think that details and those outlines of how we're gonna be labeling books or, selections of sorts we should get some kind of input from the community.
So making all the texts that are available for book clubs
Not,
available.
maybe not all of them, I'm saying a selection, hey,
Sure.
hey, we think these couple of books are in this, and this, these categories, and then let's see what the community thinks. If
You're
we're
talking-
close on our
Yeah.
assessment.
Are you talking about
Yeah.
kind of a test sample, so
Yeah.
to speak?
Yeah.
Like a sample,
I see.
just
Hmm.
maybe
I-
10, 15 bucks. at the
Yeah,
most.
I'm pretty engaged with several of our community members who are highly engaged in that and kind of been trading different lists, different resources, different tests to go through that. But I think we can, to your point, to make sure the community is aware in our, not just communicating with our families,
Yeah.
which is what book lists do, but using our district news, which goes out community-wide to everyone, and doing some structured press releases, much as we did around our recommendation stuff, so that our community is informed and can know what's the progress of the work, what are we doing, and here's how to get feedback. I think we could, again, maybe do some press releases as we keep moving through where that is, and keep promoting, here's where the discussions are and how they're accessible, so that they can continue to engage with the conversations.
Yeah, I don't know, test sample or something would be nice to know where everybody else stands.
I think
See
some
if
of
we're
those
close on
high,
assessments.
yeah, I think those ones that are turning up to be, that, as we talked about before, there's some that are really polarizing or becoming controversial in communities, they automatically would not meet the tests, some of the tests that we set forth.
Right,
For
like
here.
we meet some of the general criteria with the graphic violence percentage.
Right.
Right. They
Yes.
would make the first hurdle.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I think us getting out that first list and using that as a test, saying here's what here's what we think that looks like. To your points around, can we see this in action a little bit more? So, but great suggestions on refining kind of what that communication looks like for families, kind of some things we could get in. If you have additional feedback, again, I know it's a lot to kind of process, you've all been thinking about it certainly, but if, another idea comes to you, reach out so that we can share that with the board, like, oh, this came through and we'll make sure and incorporate it. 'Cause we'll take good ideas on stuff. So I think that's a way for us to continue advancing
Now,
the work.
do the classroom libraries fall under this?
No, not yet. So they're gonna have a whole, that's another one. So what we set up right away and communicated to families, and it will be part of that website, sounds like they launched today, for classroom libraries, because again, a general library and the classroom library. They're large catalogs. It's how to look at what my kid's checking out from the library and what are things I don't want my child to read and how to communicate with your teacher around that classroom library. So as we continue to move through, look at there, but for right now, we want families to know that we defer to them around what they want in that, so they could call up their classroom teacher and say, you know what, I don't want my child reading titles about X, Y, and Z. You know, or you know what, and sometimes they're situational, you know, a family member just died and, you know, and here's this, and this could trigger X, Y, and Z. And making your teachers aware of those things, making your library and media center staff aware of that, so they can help honor your wishes. So we have that in place right now.
Anything else? Any other questions for us?
No, I think we have what we need to begin some work. We'll start pulling you some book lists to read, sending you some books. But then your curriculum committee, it sounds like you are on the 17th. Okay, great. Then we'll target that so that we're bringing a bulk there for the group to take a first pass, and then we'll engage with our full board around the status of everything, what it's looking like, so that everyone's involved in that work this first pass.
The 17th is a Sunday, so I think
No?
that'll be the 19th.
Are you lying to us?
Well, let's see. I just wrote it down today. Let me just look quickly. 19th. Let me just double check.
I don't need to.
It is,
Good catch.
It's the
September
19th.
19th.
Yeah, you're right.
Do you have like a birthday in the family or something that's making you know randomly
We just
that
have a
that
busy
is?
week next week. It's a crazy month.
Board members, any other items, questions, observations? Any objections?